and welcome to our next episode of Big Data Talks, in which we have conversations with industry experts about the way in which data, machine learning, and artificial intelligence are changing the way we live. My name is Jean-Michel, and I will be your host today. I'm the author of the Enterprise Big Data Framework, which is hosting this series of Big Data Talks. After this recording, you can always watch back this episode on YouTube, the Big Data Framework website, and the podcasting platform on Apple Podcast. Today, I have the immense pleasure to welcome Jean-Michel towards the podcast. Jean-Michel has a passion for uncovering insights from data and using that to positively impact business and society. His mantra is to analyze, theorize, plan, and then to be decisive. By bringing data science, analytics, and machine learning together, he unleashes potential for any kind of business. After a successful career in data, consulting, and analytics spanning across the US, Europe, and Asia, Jean-Michel is currently leading the data analytics practice at Source Group, and he is using this to achieve its mission to empower enterprises to harness their data potential at any scale. Jean-Michel, thanks for taking the time to join us today. I'm incredibly happy to talk to you again. Is it correct you're presenting from Singapore today?
Yes, thank you very much for having me. It's such a pleasure to have the opportunity to share experience with your listeners. I am based in Singapore. I have been working obviously in France, USA, Germany for 9 years. And I have established Singapore as my home for the past about 11 and a half years already.
Wow, that's quite a long time already.
Yeah.
So how did you become involved with Source Group? You're now currently the head of data analytics, which is, I think, a dream job, by the sounds of it. What has been your journey over the years? How did you arrive to where you are today?
It's a long story. Do we have 2 hours?
Well, we can take as long as you want.
Yeah, let's make a shortcut. I'm a software engineer by training, and I started my career by selling application development tools on Unix system. And later I transitioned to message-oriented middleware, Java-based application server. That was in the early 2000s. And then application integration with enterprise service buses. So in 2005, 2006, those were very, very useful, very famous, and they have been deployed at large scale in enterprise on premise. And a little bit later, I moved into the complex event processing world, for especially in algorithmic trading, something that we call today streaming engine. So, but that was back then. And the tool was called Apama, and this tool has dashboard capability. So I ended up having one project where we had to build a dashboard on top of the complex event processing engine. And that was my entry in the world of analytics. And then later, first visualization, then later visual analytics with more sophisticated tool, and then later on data analytics, machine learning, and AI as we are now.
Wow, that's quite a journey so far. So you mentioned something very interesting. You said you were software engineering by trade. Does that mean you still are also sometimes rolling off your sleeve and diving into the code yourself and building algorithms and programming applications, or is that just something that you've kind of left off from now?
I do. A year and a half ago, I just finished a large project in manufacturing where I had implemented the data pipeline for collecting manufacturing data to reduce defect on the final assembly line. And I had contributed to another large project with an IoT project. And today I'm still developing visual dashboards based on Apache Spark and my team is developing the data pipeline engine. So I'm still hands-on despite all these years.
Very, very interesting. I always find it so interesting that people who love working with data ultimately cannot resist to, roll up their sleeves and get involved and do a bit of programming themselves. It kind of brings me to my next question. Where does your fascination for data comes from? Not everyone chooses this as a career, so I'm always eager to learn what are some of the key motivations that is driving people to get into this whole domain of data and analytics. What do you find so fascinating about it?
Well, I didn't choose data as my career because at that time there was no data career. So that's the point.
That has certainly changed.
So at some point, when my team and I, we built the first dashboard for a bank to track the credit card provisioning workflow using this complex event processing engine, I had to discuss with the people that IT used to call business leaders. I mean, they were the user of the dashboard, and they had questions, and they had requirements. And I realized I had to simplify very much the way I was explaining what I was doing, like collecting those data from two messaging systems, like that was TIBCO EMS and MQ Series at that time, and compiling, computing those data in order to surface some KPIs on the dashboard. And I realized they didn't care less about my messaging queue, which I was super proud of because that was difficult to correlate the two messaging systems together and compute the right KPI. They only cared about the KPI. How much credit card do we process in an hour, in a day? What is the evolution of the processing speed? Do we have more customers, less customers? And for me, that was a little bit fascinating because I realized maybe there is a bigger conversation I should have, those kind of, quote, important people. And those people, they were the one funding the project. So, when you realize that you talk to people who have the money to fund projects, suddenly you become very curious. So that's where I started to be interested in KPIs, or that was not data, that was just KPIs. And later, when I was at TIBCO Software, I became a Spotfire specialist. Spotfire is a visualization tool, so proper visual analytic tool. This is when I started to dig into the visual analytic tool and started to build dashboard. And I had a reckoning moment at that time because my target I was selling the technology to were more business users. And I was proud of building pie chart, bar chart with some colors. And they had only one question, it's like, what does it mean? I was looking at them, well, it depends, I'm not too sure, and I don't like that color. So coming from an IT perspective, that was a little bit of a shock. And then with more conversation, I ended up doing more data processing on the back end. First using R because that was prominent at that time, and then in Python, and then big data analytics, which I continue when I was at AWS within the professional services organization. I became a big data analytics specialist and then started to implement projects at scale on the cloud using data analytics. But I didn't become a data specialist in one go. It was progressive, a little bit of KPI, little bit of visualization, then visual analytics, then statistical computing, then more data processing, then machine learning, and then proper whole data analytics.
Yeah. So do you think it's progressive for everyone in the sense that because technologies are changing so fast? When I went to school, things like machine learning, artificial intelligence, it barely scratched the surface. Is it as soon as you get involved, then by keeping up to date and learning new stuff, you kind of evolve in this automatically?
I think today you can focus on data. You can start a data career because you
Correct,
have all the technology, etc. But technology is going to change in 2 to 3 years. So you want to focus on technology? Well, that's unfortunate because you are going to change anyway every 2 to 3 years for the next 10.
Yeah, you need
20.
to be really, really up to date in order to stay ahead of the curve.
And I believe at some point it's a broader discussion, but you may want to be more focused on some areas. You cannot do AI, machine learning, plus data processing, plus visual analytics and be good at everything. Technology goes so fast, you have to pick.
You have to specialize in a particular area.
But there is one area that I never left, is trying to understand what my customer want to do. Because no matter the technology, no matter if we are in 2000, 2020, 2050, if you are a consultant serving customer, understanding what they want to do is key and will always stay. How you do it doesn't really matter.
That's correct. So one of the things that always interests me, you know that I've been doing this podcast for a while, and in my previous podcast, I spoke to Mr. Vukosi, who is based out of South Africa, and he mentioned that besides the fact that he's using data in his career, and obviously every day he's involved with data-driven decisions, he also mentioned that kind of mentality and that kind of way of thinking or way of living, if you want to call it, is something that he applied towards his personal life. So in his case, he was using a very data-driven approach to start training for marathons and looking at the analytics on how he could become faster and better and more sporty in a particular way. So it got me wondering, do people who love data in their jobs are also data-driven in their personal lives? Do you consider yourself data-driven in your life outside of work?
I like to rely on facts.
Okay.
Like if I say things, I will probably, because it becomes an habit. When you do that professionally, personally, you tend to justify what you do with some data points, with a rational way of doing things. Obviously with data. For example, when my wife and we were looking at a place to stay in Singapore a few years ago, I collected the public data about rental and property price across Singapore and used visual analytics to figure out, do we have any pattern over there? And in fact, I discovered that the best price per square foot was for apartment around 1,200 square foot, because below the price per square foot was higher, which make it's understandable because smaller is the surface, the bigger the price is a little bit lower, but in fact people tend to ask for more money. But what I didn't understand is the surface above 1,000 square foot, the price per square foot was also higher. But then I discovered that because it reached a certain threshold in terms of total amount of money, it reached the people who don't care anymore too much about the global amount. That means there is an optimization price with an optimization, an optimized surface that you have. Below is more expensive and above is also more expensive. So that was very surprised to me. And well, we ended up where we are a little bit based on this analysis. So that's my story.
I actually say that that's quite a very, very exemplary of the fact of being data-driven. I don't think I've talked to a lot of people who made a public analysis of the public data before they make a decision on where they're going to live. So I kind of think I kind of can confirm my theory. So Jean-Michel, during the Big Data Days conference, which we hosted a couple of months ago, I was in your talk, and you gave a very, very interesting talk about big data strategy. And it kind of brought me to wonder a couple of quick questions to kind of pick your mind a little bit around that topic, because that's obviously one of your hallmark topics. So what I was really wondering around, and I've been seeing this a lot, especially across the Southeast Asia region, is why do so many organizations are unable to formulate a big data strategy very properly? They sometimes have it, but it's not, getting them the results they want to have. Why is that the case?
Well, yeah, thank you for your kind word. It was nice to speak during the event. I think ultimately, companies are looking at using data to make better decisions, whether it's to increase revenue, improve their operations efficiency, or maybe to increase their compliance posture in a regulated environment. And I think companies tend to jump too fast on the data wagon without having a clear understanding about what they want to achieve with it. Like often they focus on the technology. Let's build a data platform and we are going to collect the data. But they don't have a clear use case in mind, a clear example of what they can do with that data. And on the other hand, because the business leaders don't always have a good understanding of the technology stack in play and the cost of the data collection, because data collection is not free, it costs effort, you have this frustration that takes place without a clear agreement on the way forward with data. Meaning that if there is no clear agreement on the way forward, well, it's going to be difficult to build a big data strategy because it does require a strong business leaders with good technology understanding and good technical leaders who can be business focused. And without what I've seen, without a good agreement from the very top, there is no clear data strategy that can be formulated. And I've seen that over and over again. You have some direction from the very top, but technology stack people cannot agree. And then it goes sideways. People are building concurrent data platform, for example, on multiple cloud, but you still don't have any use case in production.
Correct. It's also something that I found always quite strange is that the discussion is always so quickly around technology stacks. But if you ask also the executives, you're going to spend quite a significant amount of money on managing this infrastructure. How are you going to get a return on your investment with data? It's very frequently completely silent. Nobody has a clue around what the monetization or what the return on investment needs to be. So I always find that very fascinating. It's kind of in line with what you're just saying. So let's look at some positive examples. You've had a career spanning over many years. Do you have examples of companies that you think are really leading in terms of big data strategies? Are there examples that we should look up to?
Well, I am biased. I will say Amazon. But I did invest more than 4.5 years in my career at AWS. So at AWS and Amazon, data is everywhere. So I witnessed the Amazon machine at work with a data point-based decision process across the board. So, for example, the fact that I choose to write those, what we call 6 pages, this is what we call a narrative, with justification of every single statement with data, that taught me a lot about facts, data-driven analysis, and basically leaving my feeling at home when making decision. For example, you ban the whistle words like we have fewer customers. People are going to pick up on that and ask you, how many?
Yeah.
What is the percentage? Or we dramatically increase our revenue. Listen, show me the number. How much? In which time frame? Is it a trend? Is it a one-off? They are going to probe you on every single thing. So you end up writing with no more words like we increase things, we decrease things. No, it's about hard data. Now, the interesting part as well is when you have anecdote that contradicts the data point you got, people tend to follow the anecdote because there may be a sign of something that we may have missed. So again, I am biased, but I believe Amazon is one of the great company who is harvesting data at scale. I'm thinking of another company, which is also very well known, Google, who based his entire business from the get-go on data. Google doesn't exist without data.
So let's dissect that, and let's take Amazon as an example, because I don't mind if it's biased, because that's something that you contributed to yourself for many years. If we dissect that strategy a little bit, are there then kind of components or lessons, if you want to call it like that, that basically show what are good components of a big data strategy? Is there something that we could distill as a checklist or a number of points that we should always be looking at if we want to copy that model, or we're inspired by Amazon to say, I want to become more data driven, I want to have a good big data strategy? What should be the things that we should be looking at besides, of course, calling you?
I thought a lot about it because people keep asking, do you have a checklist? Yeah, if I had, that would have been known, and I will sell it at $10,000 a pop. So I guess it depends on the maturity of the company, but I believe that any big data strategy tends to be based on three very well-known pillars. Sorry, there is no surprise. People, process, and technology. So usually I define like probably 5-6 steps. So the first one is, before you start, defining what you want to do, the what. Like if you are going to start your big data journey, trying to walk backwards from your ultimate goal and lay out like 3-5 potential use case of what you think you can do with the information that you think you already have. Because usually you think you have the information, but in fact you don't have the information. But for the sake of the exercise, pretend that you think you have that information and lay out 3-5 use cases. And then use a prioritization framework to prioritize those use cases still on paper, where there is no technology here. In fact, we are talking about the process first. And I would probably always start with the process first. So in the prioritization framework, you put on the x-axis the effort that you think it will take to collect, process, and serve the data to the expected users who are going to take some action. So think about the type of action that you want to take with those data. Otherwise, if you don't know what type of action, well, it's not a valid use case. Take another one. And on the y-axis, you put the expected return or the business impact if you don't have hard numbers on with relative to the ease with what you think you can have. So on the x-axis, ease of collection, and on the y-axis, impact. And guess what? You are looking at the magic quadrant, the one that has the biggest impact with a lot of ease. Unfortunately, the biggest impact is never the easiest one to do. Sorry, guys. And usually you may want to pick the the one that is not completely the easiest one, but just a little bit before, because this one has a little bit bigger impact. And once you do that, trying to understand where you are in the data analytic maturity scale across like 5, 6 dimensions, like do you have a data analytic team in place? Who are they? Usually you may not have an organization, but you have people. You just don't know who they are and what are their capability. Then do you have any tool already? Are you using data today? Usually you are using data somewhere, but you may not know exactly where. And then do you have any governance around it? What is your level of data-driven decision? So with that, you define the what and where you are. That's step 1. Step 2, you define the process. You look at the role and responsibility around the data at hand. Like using the domain they belong to. It can be sales data, product data, like customer data. And you define 2 main roles. The data owner, who is the business lead, and the data product owner, who is the technical lead. And you need to identify those key people and make them work together. If they cannot work together, stop there.
Yeah.
No point going on the next one and trying to start to design a data platform. No point. Because it's not going to work. You are going to have a data platform like, for example, a data lake, but there is no water. Or if you have water, there is no fish in it. So if you have no fish, what are you going to have? It's kind of useless. So look, once you have that, step 3, you design the simplest data platform that can only support the first 2 or 3 use cases, while you have the other use case in mind, but focus on the first 2. And then you work on the organization that is going to support it, implement it, and then run it. And this organization may be ad hoc because it may not be a well-defined organization yet if you are starting. So that's step 4. Step 5, implement the data platform with a simple data governance. At least a little bit of quality check, maybe a little bit of data catalog. Today you have a lot of technology that is available. It's not that complex anymore, especially if you are starting. And then last step, with everything you learned, define your data analytic roadmap with the maturity you want to reach in 6 months, 12 months, then the growing organization that you think you will need, list of the use case down the road, and the process on how to get the use case on the map. Because your users are going to ask you, okay, can you prioritize my use case first? And you need to define this process. Again, the process. So with those 3 steps, I think we have a pretty good approach. But again, it depends on the organization willingness to make it happen. And that you cannot go against if people see data as power, don't want to share anything. That's a picture of your organization, and you have to deal with that.
We're going to talk about culture a little bit more in the parts. But one thing I found very interesting is you mentioned, I would say, the classical pillar of people, process, and technology, and then that should be incorporated within a strategy. So nowadays, there's also a lot of discussion around the power of big data, how it influences decision making. There's a lot of concern around the ethics around it. So in today's modern strategies, should we add something like a 4th pillar that is more around the ethical side? How do we use data responsibly? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think any big data strategy should include some, explainability, if we can say that, in its data usage. And that should be included as part of the data governance, which should be a pillar of big data strategy. So the business leaders, they need to understand the impact of the usage of their data analytic and algorithm, the impact that those algorithms and data will have on people, like their customers, their partners. It includes privacy, such as like in Europe, right to be forgotten. So you need to include customer phones you up or send you an email. I want you to delete my data.
Yeah.
How you do that? Well, you figure it. And also the algorithm fairness, so to speak. So company, for example, can in financial service can explain to the regulator why their algorithm will not act in favor of a majority or minority type of people, or privilege a category of customers versus others. For example, you allocate a loan to a customer, the regulator wants to make sure there is a little bit of fairness here. The algo doesn't go like banana and random choice, Mr. Customer, we use deep learning, too complex, we don't understand, but hey, here's a decision. One guy got a loan, the other one doesn't. We need to be able to explain those things. Or even more worrisome is in healthcare, for example. If you use AI to detect a cancer, a tumor, well, can you afford to have a false positive?
No, you cannot.
Probably not. What if it's accuracy with 99.99? Well, that's not enough. Sorry, guys. False positive is not to be considered. So what do you do? What is the decision process in that case? So the practitioner, the doctor needs to know a little bit how the algorithm works, because he's the ultimate recommender of the decision. He will make a judgment call. If there is zero explainability of how the algorithm works, it's super difficult for the practitioner to make a decision. And he's not going to trust the system. So he's not going to use it, and will probably be based on his own experience, which he may be more comfortable with.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting point that you're bringing up, and I've seen a lot of big data strategies over the last few years, but always kind of wonder why that portion around ethics and the way that people are using data is not included. And typically senior management also doesn't know about it, and they have no clue on how those algorithms can lead to bias, as you just mentioned, or towards false positives or specific elements that might have a very detrimental effect on people's lives. So I always find that's a very, very interesting point of view. So if we build a little bit on that, you've already mentioned some new fascinating technologies. I'm quite sure that in your day-to-day job, you're seeing a lot of very fascinating use cases or companies that are really transforming the way we live through data and big data specifically. What are some of the more exciting stuff that you see happening in our domain?
I may think probably three examples. The first one is manufacturing. I like manufacturing because it's concrete. You can touch products, as opposed to do something fully digital that is completely virtual. I guess that's my old habit of touching things.
I agree with you. I'm an industrial engineer by trade, so I love factories and the way that they actually produce stuff.
So in manufacturing, the fact that you can now collect data almost as fast as the data is being generated by the machine and use cloud to process data at scale, it really changed the game. Because suddenly you can use sophisticated algorithms to detect anomaly. And for example, when you have a complex final assembly line where you assemble a hard disk with many parts from many other factories, and suddenly you have an anomaly, and suddenly when you test the hard disk after 1 week, it fails. Well, you have the power to detect something much, much, much sooner. And the game on the final assembly line is how you can increase the yield. and even 0.3% is heaven for the operators, for the production people. So that's exciting because it's difficult. It's difficult to collect the right data at the right time and to process it on time, not really in real time, but just on time, and get insight soon enough, just soon enough. And soon enough really depends on what you manufacture and what is the price of the product that you produce. Because if you produce very expensive product, you may want to be very, very soon, to detect things very, very soon. Because if you detect things too late, well, you already manufactured the 10,000 product and it's down the drain because you lost.
Throw that away.
Yeah, you lost money. In the travel space, I've seen more and more airlines who have industrialized the use of weather forecast, mainly wind and temperature. Why it's useful? Well, because if you optimize the flight route for their aircraft, you can consume less fuel. It costs less. It depends mainly on the temperature. Colder is better, warmer is not good. And on the wind, having a tailwind is much better than having a nose wind. Now, if you go from east to west, well, sorry guys, you are not on Earth. Usually on the North Hemisphere, you are not on the right one, but you can probably fly at a given flight level that has less wind against you. So as a result, you can arrive sooner. You may have more time and less cost in terms of fuel. So that's very important. And in the banking space, when you play around with your mobile app, you can see that you have more and more suggestion about the amount that you could save or potential investment based on your profile, because the mobile app is computing things all the time. You don't feel it, but suddenly you have a button, it pops up, and okay, so it makes sense. Yes. So then suddenly you have an app that helps you making a better decision, whether it's saving, whether it's budget management, like provide you some insight. Hey, this time, this month, you did spend that amount in restaurant and you didn't really notice until the app suddenly tells you, oh, yeah, you're right. Okay, maybe I should be more careful. So those three examples, I feel they really have a practical impact on the company output and on the customer. So it's tangible.
Yeah, I really like these examples, especially because, as you mentioned, they're very practical, and it's basically unintentionally changing the way that we live every single day in terms of the apps and the suggestions that you're getting. When I'm using the apps and combining some of those as well, you sometimes get suggestions on where should your next holiday be going to, or the next flights in that particular direction might also be of interest. So that's what I think it's really reshaping the way that we are living. That's not always good from a budget perspective, but it is helping with a lot of the decision making. So Jean-Michel, we already talked a little bit around your time at AWS. It's obviously something that you've written a lot about. Also, I noted when I started doing a bit of preparation and research for this interview that you talked a lot around data-driven culture. So for everyone who's listening and has no clue what a data-driven culture is, what do you mean with that term?
Data-driven culture. It's, I believe it has three kind of maturity level. First, you become data aware, like you start to get the data in static report, and you start to understand a little bit what's happening. And you start to realize that data might be important. And usually you start maybe with financial data, and at this level, you have few users in a given company. Then the second level is becoming more data informed. You realize what what you see means, the impact of what you see. So you start to really understand the implication of the numbers that you see in front of you. And usually you have interactive dashboard behind it. You have data warehouse. Sometimes you have data lake, so you have more users. And also you have more data available, so you can suddenly cross-check things. Looking at various...
Is that what they now refer to nowadays as data literacy? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, correct. Data literacy. So you are informed.
Yeah.
And then the next level is you want to use data to guide you. So first level, if you are a little bit aware. Second level, you start to understand the implication. And third level, which is what I call data-driven, when the organization at large will guide most of its decision based on the use of data. That means behind the scene, you need to have enhanced data platform with AI, ML capability. You need to have more data across the organizations, across the departments. And you need to have automated insights. So you have algos that are providing automated insights. So you got alert, various type of alert on various type of KPIs automatically. And at that level, you become, I think, more data-driven organization. So I think when most of the employees of the company understand the role of data, know how to harvest its potential, and is comfortable taking decisions based on data without getting their feelings on the way, we can probably say we have reached a good level of data-driven culture within the organization.
Well, I think especially the last point you're mentioning around people's feelings getting in the way, that's still the largest hurdle to overcome. I've seen so many great research and great reports, and all the data points towards one direction, but the company still goes another because of that level of emotion. And it kind of brings me to my next question. If we are to compare those different organizations together, so one which would be completely data-driven and has a very active data-driven culture, and one who doesn't, do you think in the long run that the data-driven organization is gonna outperform the company that isn't?
It depends, because you may also have a good business sense. Right. So some people are good in making business decisions. They have little data, but they have a good intuition. So they may, because the quantity matters. You can make a very good data-driven decision, but if you have very little data, well, how many decisions you are going to make? Will those decisions be really important? Probably not. So it depends. I think when you have a data-driven culture, it democratizes the better decision-making process across the company employees. And I think it enables everyone to participate into a better decision-making process to enhance, for example, customer experience or revenue, because you have more people involved in, I would qualify, more rational decision process. Overall, you make an organization more performant. And in some cases, for example, anti-money laundering in a financial sector, data is a fuel to build the compliance solution. Without data and complex algo, you cannot demonstrate to the regulator that you comply with anti-money laundering laws and you are doing the right thing. Well, if you are a bank, it's a little bit, I would say, I'm trying to find the word, a little bit sad because you may lose your license.
Yeah, well, that's a major problem for most institutions.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, so I agree. I think ultimately, there's always going to be key decision makers and people who have a very good intuition, as you mentioned. But I think to compensate with or combining that with a data-driven culture will ultimately help you to not just make those decisions based on the gut feeling, but also to actually base them onto something which is tangible. So if we now tie that back to the first part of our discussion, which is around big data strategy. I have a quick question for you to think about. Should a data-driven culture be part of a strategy, or a big data strategy? Or should the strategy be part of a data-driven culture?
How much I can win if I got the answer right?
Yeah, well, I'm not quite sure whether I know the answer myself. So that's why I thought it would be a very interesting.
I think if you want to become a data-driven organization, you probably have in mind some kind of big data strategy already. It's because you want to do something with data. So I would argue you got a strategy in place first. Because you wouldn't have the idea of becoming data-driven organization without any reason.
Correct.
So I would say the strategy will drive the data-driven organization enablement.
I think I'm going to agree to that train of thought, and I'm going to completely copy that line of thinking from you. But I thought it would be an interesting question.
Yeah, because I think the data awareness will grow throughout the organization as more output is produced and more people are participating to a data-driven decision and see the result. And you need to have a big data roadmap. You need to have a bunch of use cases. So in order to bring with you the entire organization.
Yeah. Speaking about getting more and more people involved, you told it in the introduction already. You have been working at various different places on the planet. I saw France, I saw Germany, and obviously Singapore today. Do you see, or did you experience that there is a difference in terms of data-driven culture in different parts of the world, or is it pretty universal?
I think there are differences. What I found in the US, people are very pragmatic. Mm-hmm. They look at the data, no feeling. They can explore things and make decisions without much feeling, so to speak. So that makes a data-driven culture maybe easier to implement because you don't get your feeling on the way anyway, and it's an habit. So your own culture makes things easier. Now, if you move to Germany, where I invested 9 years of my career, Germany is a little bit more risk adverse and tend to follow a well-established process. So if you harness the data potential with new insights, that might suggest you need to change the process. It may go a little bit against the culture, and it may be a little bit more difficult to implement this. In fact, it's not necessarily a data-driven culture, it's a changing culture. The fact that you get the data and you are going to change the way you do things because of new data. And it's not necessarily in the habit of people who rely on efficient process, and if this process is efficient, why I should change it? So the experimentation side of things is a little bit, I believe, is a little bit more difficult to implement. Now, if we move in our part of the world, in Asia, well, outside financial services, because it's a little bit different, I have witnessed a lot of experimentation. People are not afraid to break things. Now, the challenge is often organizations, they don't have a strong enterprise process in place, like in Germany. So to deploy their machine learning algorithm, good luck. It's a little bit ad hoc. especially in digital native organizations, the ones that are born on the cloud. I'm not going to give any name, but they tend to have a younger generation in charge, not much experience in enterprise process. So sure, they make a lot of data decision, but sometimes you may question, is data the right one? And was the data collected at the right time, which is as important as having a good algorithm.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. What the challenges that you're just mentioning in order to also kind of increase some experience and into the way that we are dealing with these kinds of, especially more process-oriented way of working, it sometimes makes me wonder if we are not becoming, as a culture, too much data-driven. In your opinion, do you think that we are moving towards a world where too much decisions are based on data? And to kind of illustrate that with an example, one of my friends last week showed me some kind of beautiful pictures that he made, and he said, this is what we refer to as algorithmic art. Basically, we're using an algorithm to put together colors and different paintings and shapes, and it looks obviously nice, and it was kind of combining old masters together and kind of reframing it in a completely different manner. And it was kind of like a Van Gogh, but then with a person on the moon. So obviously that was impossible at that time. So it makes me wonder at times if, because of all of the things that we are obviously contributing to as well, are we becoming too data-driven? I know it's a bit of a philosophical question, but I'd like to pick your brain on that.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. I think no matter what, we should always keep the human in the loop. Yeah. Machine ruling the world. Well, machines have been created by human. So you get the bias that humans have. And the machine is not going to eliminate the bias that the person who builds the algorithm has. Or the data. Bias is usually stored in the data anyway. And I believe there is a lot of room for producing a lot of interesting art. But I would say if you produce some art using some original work from any artist, you should have a retribution, especially if you are going to sell your art. You should have a retribution to that artist. So we shouldn't have, and maybe it's a philosophical question, like free art produced on the back of somebody who did work hard, and you are going to sell something, make money, without retributing the guy who was the source of your income, basically. Yes. To illustrate my point, there was, I'm thinking, there was a recent fury in Japan that was 2 weeks ago. There was a French artist who used the DALI algorithm to produce comics with the same style than a guy named, I think it's Kim Young-ji. He's a South Korean artist who unfortunately passed away in October this year. He was still young. And people were furious, and the guy was trying to honor the artist, but people were furious that somebody did use algorithm to reproduce any type of image with the same style. And it seems people start to be more sensitive in what can be done and what we should avoid using this advanced algorithm. For example, that was a year, 2 years ago, there was a lot of deep fake on the web. And then it kind of disappeared because the technology is there. We can do everything we want. But people are policing and removing those because it seems, fortunately, it seems there is a limit that people are not able to go beyond. And that's nice because machine at the end shouldn't completely rule the world. Maybe I'm old school on this one. And using algorithm to produce new art is great, all for it. But if you are using hard work from existing artists, please contribute to their living, at least.
I think that's
reference them.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very valuable lesson, and also something to really start thinking about how we're going to deal with the incorporation of other intellectual property, basically, of other people moving forward. So, Jean-Michel, I noticed that we've already been talking for an hour. I could probably easily fill up another hour with you. But unfortunately, we're almost out of time. And I'm going to ask you one last question. You might have heard this question many times before in all of the previous episodes, because I ask it to all of our guests. It's kind of the end of the show. And that is, do you have a favorite algorithm? And if yes, what is the beauty of your specific algorithm?
I like XGBoost or gradient boosting machine before XGBoost. It reminds me on one of the large projects I did with Spotfire while I was working for TIPCO. I use it to build a decision tree that display graphically the purity of the node based on the underlying data containing the binary prediction fail and pass. So whether an hard disk is going to fail or pass, and this node with all those criteria is 99% red. So okay, with all those criteria, the disk will fail. Okay, and this one is half. And the fact that I could render it visually, that was very nice, because that was complex, but the visualization was relatively simple and people could understand. And that would be my favorite. I still like it very much. Of course, there are some more complex algo, like deep learning algo with how many layers, how many neurons, etc., BERT, etc. But I found it's a little bit black box, and I don't like much black box. I prefer to have an algo that is robust, which I can understand. So I'm going to explain to somebody visually, this is those criteria that leads to a failure. So those are the most important criteria in the parameters. And I feel more comfortable as opposed to tell somebody, well, the latest LSTM algo was able to provide an accuracy of 99.999, so I think it's a perfect match. No.
But sometimes the beauty of an algorithm is in its simplicity, and it doesn't always need to be overly complex or black box to be very interesting. I also tend to like the more simple ones because it's easy to explain and typically easy to visualize. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts, Jean-Michel. Last question from my side is, you know that I'm trying to advocate the Enterprise Big Data Framework to make sure that there is an open standard for big data best practices all across the world. And we recently launched a Big Data Ambassador program. Okay. I would love to have you as an ambassador within the Big Data Framework Network. Would you accept my invitation?
Oh, yeah, sure. Happy to contribute. And if I disagree, I will share my thoughts as well.
That's exactly what we expect.
Any framework leads to interpretation, which is the most interesting part.
Yeah, that's why we're also trying to make it available for everyone, so that it's structuring the mind is what I typically like to refer to.
Yeah, sure. Happy to contribute.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Jean-Michel. Again, as I mentioned, I could probably spend easily another hour, maybe even two, in talking to you and having a conversation and picking your brain. It's been a real big pleasure to have you on Big Data Talks. Your words of wisdom are greatly appreciated. I hope it helps inspire others to start thinking about things differently and start to think about the way in which data is changing the world around us. Thanks so much for your participation, and I'm pretty sure we're going to stay in touch.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, Jan-Willem. It was a real pleasure talking to you today, and I look forward to the next time.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jean-Michel.
Thank you. Take care. Have a good evening. Bye.